Dr. H. Wainhouse is the Distinguished Research Professor of Theology, Law, Culture, and Archaeology at Faith International University and Seminary in Tacoma, Washington. He and his wife Irina have taught and directed many tours in the Mediterranean and Middle East, including Israel, Greece, Egypt, Jordan, Italy, and Turkey, particularly with the Biblical Archaeological Society. Dr. House has taught biblical and theological studies at several universities and seminaries during a teaching career of over 50 years and has written 150 articles and 50 books, including the Evangelical Dictionary of World Religions, The Jesus Who Never Lived, Exposing False Christs and Finding the Real Jesus, the Zondervan Handbook of Biblical Archaeology, Israel, the Land and the People, an Evangelical Affirmation of God's Promises, and editor of the Nelson NKJV Study Bible and Nelson New Illustrated Bible Commentary. Dr. House is the general editor of the Evangelical Exegetical Commentary Series, 44 volumes, with logos, Faithlife. It is the knowledge amassed from these experiences, along with the assistance of biblical scholars at a variety of universities and seminaries throughout the world, that provides the information contained in his latest project, the House Visual Study Bible Online. Thank you for joining Archaeology and the Lands of the Bible with Dr. H. Wainhouse.
Well, there, Dr. H. Wainhouse. We're trying to get everybody else involved here.
Yeah.
So, Dr. House, maybe you want to do a little bit of an introduction of what we're going to be talking about tonight?
Yeah, I definitely will. Am I the only one that can? Okay, it's sort of a little different. I know you're having trouble. Well, first thing we have to ask is, everybody bought all my books? And if you haven't, be sure to do that. now that we've had the advertisements for the program,
Exactly.
Tonight we're going to do something a little different. I'm picking on what I did last time with Qumran and some of the teachings going on in the Jewish community, the general community in Israel, the differences between that and what was occurring in the scene community there, as well as Antioch. We sort of went into that last night. So I thought what we'd do tonight is look at some of the archaeological information that we have that is not written so much in general about specific things in the Gospels. Is the fact that the biblical authors, when they wrote, they were aware of these kinds of events, and we have now had substantiation on those things in various archaeological finds. And we'll talk about that because, see, there are people, I listened to anybody familiar with Bill Maher?
Yeah.
Maher. I sat next to him on a plane one day. I didn't talk to him. I didn't know him. But I remember him later.
Yeah.
But nonetheless, he was talking to Charlie Kirk, and another time he was talking to a psychologist who's very well known, but I can't think of the name. He's from Canada.
Oh, Jordan Peterson?
Yeah, that's the guy. Yeah. And they were both talking about God and the Bible and Jesus and so forth. And of course, Bill Maher, he was very negative about everything, saying, you have these ideas, but you don't have any ability to support them.
Right.
There's no evidence, he said, that Jesus actually was a human being who lived and died and so forth. And so I thought, well, there's a man who talks a lot but doesn't do any reading apparently, and also is not much of a scholar. Because even the most liberal scholars in the world in biblical circles have difficulty somehow setting aside what we have archaeological and in literary materials regarding Jesus actually having lived. Now, they may not believe in the resurrection, but that's another story, which I'm going to tell you a tiny bit right now, and I'm going to be making this one of my talks upcoming, and I'll tell you why. But first, we're gonna look at our presentations on the archaeology of Jesus, and is there evidence for the person and work of Jesus the Messiah in ancient documents? If people, if he actually lived and made much of an impact, people somewhere besides Jerusalem, for example, would know about that. And when you have Greco-Roman works, both the Greek and Latin works, when they talk about people, they are people that would be, generally speaking, known. And so that's what's true of Jesus, even though he was a Jew, and this all occurred in Jerusalem. Nonetheless, there's evidence in the writings of those that are not Christians, those that are not believers, that they recognize a person called Jesus and certain things about Jesus that are consistent with what we know in the scriptures themselves. So anyway, that's where we're going to go. And I have presentation 2. It says, is there evidence for the person work of Jesus Messiah in ancient documents? Now, before I go on to that, I want to tell you, I went just the other day to a presentation in Houston. A couple of friends of mine were working on this. A guy by the name of Craig Evans and a man by the name of Scott. Can't even think of his name now. Isn't that terrible? But Scott is stripping, and he found a very ancient piece that had the earliest Hebrew now we've seen.
Mm.
Did that in the amount of the little hills of blessing and cursing over there close to Shiloh. So anyway, this was a very interesting presentation, and I think they're going to be taking that a number of places. But it's about the Shroud of Turin, and I've been reading on the Shroud of Turin in different books and articles and so forth for probably, I guess, about 3 decades that I've looked at stuff, and I was especially led to that by Gary Habermas. So it's been an interesting read, and now they've come up with even more information, and it's making me believe more and more that we actually do have evidence of the resurrection of Jesus in that shroud. And I'll talk about that not tonight, but I'll give a presentation of that when we discuss the issue of the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus. That'll be a couple away. All right.
Okay.
What I said so far.
So we're going to try to do a share screen here. Just so everyone knows, I'm having technical difficulties. I'm not sure I'm going to overcome them. I'm going to try. So here we go. Presentation 2.
Oh, look at that.
There it is. It's a miracle of all things.
There we are.
Anything else? All right.
And you are on.
Fantastic. You did a miracle. Okay. Now, presentation 2. I just said that. So let's keep moving now. We've lost a little time. Literary documents that confirm the gospel accounts of Jesus. These are not Christians.
Mm-hmm.
These are people that are in the pagan world.
Mm.
Some are Greeks, some are Romans, and others. But we have Pliny the Younger here in his letter to Trajan, about 1:10. And I think he's an interesting character because what he said just opens up a lot of place for discussion. So let me just read this here. Christians maintained, I say Christians because Christians come from Christ. That's where they got the name.
Right.
Christians maintained that their fault or error amounted to nothing more than this, that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day before sunrise and reciting an antiphonal hymn to Christ as God and binding themselves with an oath not to commit any crime, but to abstain from all acts of theft, robbery, and adultery, and some other forms of sin like that, from breaches of faith, from repudiating a trust when called upon to honor it. After this, it was their custom to separate and then to meet again to partake of food. Now, the first thing I want to bring to our attention, anybody knows of a church that meets that way today? Look at all these particulars that are connected here.
Sure.
These are believers that had to find places to sort of hide out sometimes, according to where you are. There's also a statement from Pliny later on to Trajan about something else, I believe it is, but I'll have a chance to say that. But notice the standards that they established morally and in reference to relationships with people, and obviously believing in Christ as God, which is a big issue. And I don't know really, anybody ever sung an antiphonal hymn? I've never done one.
No.
James, don't you do that? But
that would be a hymn where you have two groups answering each other.
okay.
So a call and response is like an individual in the choir. It would be two choirs.
So they were singing
trade back and forth.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's a hymn to Christ as God. So that shows that he knew something accurate about him.
Yeah, this is 110 also, which is interesting. I mean, we're just talking about just as the turn of the century with the writing of the Revelation, the last book of the Bible, and the writings of Paul. If you take them, let's say in the 50s and 60s, maybe the 40s, it's not that far away
Mm-hmm.
from the teachings of the Gospels, and also the letters of the apostles. So this is an important statement. I believe it is plenty, and I'm willing to be corrected. I've been known to be wrong, but I believe that maybe Pliny also wrote to Trajan. He was concerned about the fact that the temples were being forsaken.
Mm.
And he said it's related to this new heresy or viewpoint that's being presented, that people are leaving the temples and going to Christianity. And he was asking him, what are we supposed to do about this?
Right.
They weren't liking their temples being forsaken. So sort of like the Muslims with the Christians in Iran.
Right.
Same kind of problem. Anyway, so that's a statement out of Pliny. Now that clearly indicates that at an early period, and see that's the early period between, let's say, the 50s and 50, 60 years of passing on information about Christ and recognizing him not merely as Messiah, but as God. And then some of these other kind of features you see taught somewhat in the teachings of Jesus and also by the apostles. So here's an example demonstrating that it's most likely true that Jesus lived. And he was known here as Christos. Of course, in Hebrew, it was Mashiach,
Mm-hmm.
Messiah, but this is the Greek use of the term not Logos, but Christos. So that's the first one. Let's go to the second one now. Let's sort of see some portions that we. Do we make two there? Go back one.
You got plenty.
I just said that one. Okay, just be sure.
Yeah, the next one.
Now this is Tacitus. Now, but all human effort, all the lavish gifts of the emperor, and the propitiations of the gods did not banish. This may be the one I was thinking of. Let me keep reading. Did not banish the sinister belief that the conflagration was a result of order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations. So this relates to what occurred in Rome, called Christians by the populace. Christus, and here's a debate, but Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hand of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate. And a deadly superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but also in the city where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world meet and become popular. Now, what city is he talking about there?
Detroit.
Detroit.
Chicago. No.
Okay, get serious.
Oh.
Talking about Rome. Yeah. Now, here's a problem here. This is with Nero. This isn't the one we looked at before. And there have been people who've argued that Christus here referred to a local Christian or an local individual in Rome that brought this problem on. And so then Nero's basically were persecuting people that bought into this Christus. When you read this in the context, don't you think this is much more likely to be referring to Jesus under the word Christus? And it's not Christos, but it's Christus, I guess a more of a Latin form, that you have here occurring under Nero. And of course, Nero took advantage of this to persecute anybody in Rome that would be embracing this view of Christus. I think when he mentions Pontius Pilate, issue of Tiberius, to me, I don't know why people would argue that Christus here refers to someone else other than Christ or Christos.
Right.
But people have done that if you read the materials. So I think, of course, Nero tried to find ways to excuse himself for his heinous views
Mm-hmm.
and actions. And I don't know if he really played the violin well, but he did try to dissuade individuals from believing that he had anything to do with the fire in
Right.
Rome when he was probably the major culprit. He was wanting to clear out a place for some work he wanted done. So that's what you do. You burn out what you don't like, and that way you can build up again.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably what occurred. But anyway, the point of it is we're dealing here at the time of Nero. Now, when was Nero the emperor of Rome?
Nero. Let's
It'll
see.
be the 60s.
That's very good. Yes. The 60s. So we're gone beyond the other one we had that went about 110 and went back, 50 years or so.
Yeah, 54 to 68.
Yeah. So see, this is in a time that's very contemporary
Very close.
with what we're looking at in the biblical text.
Yeah.
They're talking about the Gospels and some of the later epistles. So all I'm saying here is that even we had something that was early as far as history goes in the first statement, but this one right here of Tacitus puts us right back into the time of Nero and the writing still of some of the books of Paul.
Yeah, this is just prior to the destruction of the temple, apparently.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that was
very
80s.
close.
Yeah.
Right.
And of course, Nero didn't survive too long. A lot of people didn't like him, including those that were his soldiers.
Yeah.
And so he went away. And but this demonstrates the antiquity of information of Christians who are following after a person called Christos, I think is probably what we're talking here.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always wondered why people question that. Let's go to the next. Now, Mara Bar Serapion, he's not well known, probably. You don't know that name. But this is a Syriac work about 1873. So here we're about in between
Mm-hmm.
Nero and the initial one we started with. He has some interesting things to say, and that's the reason I brought it up here. First of all, we've dealt with the Latin works and maybe Greek, and then now we have something in Syriac. But look at the word here. It says it's after 73, but it may have been even later, but it's hard to know. You have documents that are written, and then you have later records of them. That's how the New Testament is, much in the Old Testament and so forth. These documents oftentimes have earlier editions, and you actually are using something that's 100 years later or 200 years later. But scholars in general don't just set these aside and say, well, it's written too late, because these things are copied by hand and transferred down the decades throughout the first, second, third, and fourth century. Now, what advantage, he says, did the Athenians gain from putting Socrates to death? Anybody read that story?
About Socrates?
Yeah. And his death, how did he put to death?
He was given like some poisonous drink or something like that.
He drank his hemlock. They let you put yourself to death. I assume if you didn't agree to that, they had alternatives for you.
I'm sure they did.
That would have been more painful. When I was at my undergraduate work, my undergraduate work was a bachelor's in my bachelor's was in classical and Hellenistic Greek. And I eventually, the second year, became the Greek teacher's grader. And so I like Greek a lot. But I had to read this whole story of Socrates and the hemlock in Greek. So just keep in mind, be glad for translations.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's pretty.
That's important. That's important. So he says, famine and plague came upon them as a judgment for their crime, that is against Socrates. In a moment, their land was covered with sand. So, what advantage did the Jews gain from executing their wise king? Who was that? So that's an issue.
Yeah.
The wise king here that the Jews executed.
Hmm.
Well, you're not talking about David and Saul or any of these guys. You're talking about someone else, the Jews executing the wise king. It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. When was that?
70 AD.
70 AD. So you're talking about something occurring in the, middle 30s or so. So it's not too long between you have the coming of the destruction of the city of Jerusalem. It was just after that their kingdom was abolished. God justly avenged these three wise men. Oh, I didn't mention Samos gaining from burning Pythagoras. I forgot Pythagoras.
Yeah.
But you have three people that Mara Bar Serapion picked out who were unjustly put to death. And it's interesting that this writing includes this one that's a Jewish king who's very wise. These Athenians died of hunger. Samians were overwhelmed by the sea, and the Jews, ruined and driven from their land, live in complete dispersion.
True.
Socrates did not die for good. He lived on in the teaching of Plato. Pythagoras did not die for good. He lived on in the statue of Hera. Nor did the wise king die for good. He lived on in the teaching which he has given. So I think it's reasonable to argue that he's speaking here of Jesus based on the information. Now, this guy's not a Christian, and he's not, he's not giving details, but he's recognizing historically certain things happen. One of which, the wise king was executed by the Jews. Now, we know the Romans did the actual work.
Right.
But the Jews who said, crucify him, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Pontius Pilate really wanted to let him go. His wife had a terrible dream saying, "Leave this guy alone." Seriously, you know that, right?
Yeah.
And so he really tried to find a way to let him go, but the Jews
would not relent.
Crucify him.
They said, "We have no king but Caesar."
That's right, and there was no Roman doing that. It's the Jews here. So that's why we have this statement of Mara Bar Serapion. Okay, next slide.
Suetonius?
Another account we have is called Suetonius. And Suetonius wrote in the life of Claudius. Now we're dealing with AD 120. But as far as history goes and documents go and famous people go, these dates are not in any way a problem.
Mm-hmm.
There are some who I know. I listened to Mara again. I was telling you about that, and he was saying, that's so far removed. How would you so I can really live? And I'm thinking, look at all the Greeks and the Roman authors. Go back we can go back to the time of the turn of the millennium.
Yeah.
We go all the way to the 4th and 3rd centuries. People like with not only Socrates, but who else?
Mm-hmm.
Who else lived at that time?
Oh, you mean Plato? Who else?
Aristotle.
All these Greek guys.
Many, many others that are believed to be true, and yet we have far more evidence about Jesus than we do any of these other major authors.
And they believe them.
Yeah, they believe them right off the bat. They teach them in school probably.
Mm-hmm.
But Jesus, even though he is far more likely based on the evidence than they are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm trying to talk to you about. So Suetonius in the life of Claudius, Claudius, expelled the Jews from Rome on account of the riots. And I guess this goes back to Nero. I'm sorry, yes, Nero. He expelled the Jews from Rome on account of the riots in which they were constantly indulging at the instigation of Christus. And we've just talked about Nero, and what he is doing in this book is recounting that. Punishment was inflicted on the Christians, a body of people addicted to a novel and mischievous superstition. I'm thinking more and more people in America who are leftist, we have some of the same ideas, that we who are Christians are sort of oddballs and need to be put down. See that kind of thing going on?
Nothing new. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been going on for just as not the Muslims, although they're their part,
Sure.
but even leftists in our society today. There was a time when you ran the polls and said how many believe in God, you had something like, and I read these, my goodness, back in the when was that? But back in, let's say, the 80s, I guess, when the polls were running like 80% or more.
Mm-hmm.
That's jumped down quite a bit. Now, uh, we have the lives of the Caesars. We've talked about punishment inflicted on Christians. Now, the last one here is showing that this demonstrates that the number of Christians who lived in Rome between 54, approximately 20 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, that refers specifically to the work of Nero. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
All right, let's move ahead. I'm just showing you examples that I doubt if you've looked at all of these.
Lucian.
Now, literary documents that confirm the gospel, non-Christian, Lucian of Samosata. So if that's Samosata, maybe.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
God bless you.
Thank you very much. A second century work again. I'm trying to reiterate the fact we're dealing with very close documents as far as history goes.
Mm-hmm.
Christians, worship a man to this day, the distinguished personage who introduced their novel rites and was crucified on that account. Now, I don't really think you could demonstrate that Jesus was crucified on the account that because you look at the account in the scriptures, at least, his crucifixion didn't deal with what his disciples thought
Right.
or how they thought about Jesus. It really related to Jesus himself, not the disciples. Would you agree?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of playing with this here. But it is true that Christians worship a man. And see, that seems odd, doesn't it?
Mm.
You ever thought about that? Jesus was a man and we worship a man.
Hmm.
There you get into Christian theology, the whole question of he's both God and man in one person.
Right.
That's a key. Norm Geisler gave this to me once, and I've used it ever since. And that is this. When we talk about the fact of the theophany of Christ,
Mm-hmm.
and this occurred at the Council of Ephesus about at 431, I think, when they did this with reference to Mary, Mother of Jesus.
Hmm.
The fact is that with Jesus, we have one person who is two natures,
Mm-hmm.
one who and two whats.
Mm-hmm.
He's fully a what called human and a what called God. The person is in the two whats, nature.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you come to the question of the Trinity, you're saying just the opposite. You're saying there is one nature and three whos. So one what, three whos.
Mm.
That's how you can sort of remember the issue of the Trinity of Christ, of God, and the divinity and humanity of Jesus. So these are important little ways sometimes to remember things. But we worship a man, but he's a man who is also God simultaneously. So that's important to distinguish. Christians were doing something that they thought was really weird. They believed in worshiping all sorts of deities, all sorts of gods,
Mm-hmm.
but having one who was a man didn't make any sense to them.
Right. Right.
Remember Jesus' teaching with a guy who was brought down from the roof?
Mm-hmm.
He got there, and the first thing he did to him says, "Your sins are forgiven."
Yeah.
That seems odd to start off with that one.
Well, like my legs.
And they said, "How can you forgive? Only God can forgive sins." He said, "So that I can teach you that the Son of Man has power on earth." Then he says, "Be healed."
Yeah.
He did it just in the opposite order, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
But the lesson was being taught by Jesus by doing that.
Right.
Any comments on anything we've done so far? I'm just showing the evidence of early dating and thinking about Jesus as God and sometimes even what he is as man. Okay.
Very good.
Uh-oh. Let's see. There we go. Did I do that or you?
Mm.
I did. No, I didn't. You did.
I did it.
I pushed this thing here and it went, and I thought, I didn't think I had control.
At the same time.
Now, you know who Flavius Josephus is, right?
Labios, yeah.
I don't know if you know this, but Jews only in recent days, and by that I mean the last 40, 50 years, have accepted Josephus as part of the group. He's back in the group
Oh, he's back in.
because they did not like him throughout Jewish history from the time of the late first century all the way up to the modern era until recently, because Josephus was, what did he do? He survived the AD 70 war because the guy who was went up to a place in northern Israel where they have a great little hill there. You can go and look at it. I'm not going to go into that.
Mhm.
But he had they had a city there on top, and he was a general. And when they came to take over, he was very smart. He actually told a man who was not emperor at this time, but he told him that he would be emperor.
Mm.
And it happened. So this guy liked him a lot. So Josephus actually, by the time the war ended in AD 70, Josephus was actually with the Romans observing what was taking place in reference to the destruction of Jerusalem. And then the Romans gave him a really nice house in Rome to live in and write books. And
Right.
that's Josephus, and they didn't like him. They thought he was a traitor.
Right.
But now they like him more because he provides a lot of information that people want.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's about Josephus. About this time arose Jesus, a wise man. Now, notice I have these underlined portions. The reason why I have those is because there's question as to whether these probably were in the autographa, the original writings of Josephus. It's unlikely that Josephus would have said these things in the context of the Roman people at Rome. It's also questionable that he would have said it and expect to receive reception by the Jewish population that did not embrace Jesus.
Mm.
I have to say, he was the Messiah. You know, he appeared to them the third day.
Right.
It's probably unlikely that Josephus said these words. Now, why would they have happened? Guess who got hold of Josephus's words? Not the Jews, but it's Christians who read Josephus.
Mm.
And when the Christians read Josephus, they thought, we need to correct this just a tiny bit.
Yeah.
And this happens in biblical manuscripts. By the way, the Greek manuscripts we have for Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and so forth, all of those have gone through people who wrote copies from other copies from other copies and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes what happens, there are 5 centers of Christian copying, if we want to say that in the ancient world. And what happened is that if someone made a notation in a margin, just giving their perspective or what they thought was a better idea or so forth, the guy who got that manuscript 50 years later and sat down to do his copying has got to figure it out. Let's see, was that in the original or was that a copy?
Right.
And so they started sticking it in the original copying. So,
Just in case.
so that's why you end up with some of this stuff. But anyway, let's keep going. About this time arose Jesus, a
Wise man.
man, if indeed it be right to call him a man. See, that's not. For he was a doer of marvelous deeds and a teacher of men who gladly received the truth. He drew himself to many persons, both of the Jews and also the Gentiles. He was the Messiah, the Christ. Unlikely he would have said that much. But Pilate, upon the indictment of the leading men among us, had condemned him to the cross. Those who loved him and at first did not cease to do so, for, quote, he appeared to them alive on the third day, the godly prophets having foretold these and 10,000 other things about him. You think Josephus, the historian of the Jewish people, said this? I doubt it. So those are probably add-ons. But the rest of it probably makes sense. And even to this day, the race of Christians who are named from him has not died out. And of course, that's true. So That's what I would say. Someone may question me on that. I don't know. But I try to think what is most reasonable and what is not based on who he was, where he was, and what was going on at this time period.
Mm-hmm.
This is the late 70s, 80s, 90s, in that area.
Yeah.
Okay. Any comments, questions,
Makes sense. Makes sense.
rebuttals? None? Okay.
No.
Okay. The next one we have is the Jewish Antiquities. And notice here, he, Annas the Stronger, convened a judicial session of the Sanhedrin and brought before it the brother of Jesus, the so-called Christ.
Mm.
That sort of indicates in the Jewish Antiquities that was written by Josephus that probably this is a statement that would have been said rather than what he said. See it?
Mm.
And so the brother was James, the one that's so-called Christ, the so-called Messiah, and some others whom he charged with breaking the law and handed over to be stoned to death. James was put to death in AD 62. James was a half-brother of Jesus, the head of the Council of Jerusalem that occurred among the apostles and others, if you need that information. So the fact is that it's likely that this statement also demonstrates what was said in the other. It's never the Messiah himself, but you'll find even in the Talmud and some of the various Jewish works through the hundreds of years, before the Reformation, you'll find statements even in those works by the Jews that they would say Jesus was the so-called Christ.
Right. Right.
They didn't accept him as Christ and so forth. What they did usually is got the disciples' names wrong. So if you the Jewish Talmud. Okay, let's keep moving.
Onwards.
Babylonian Talmud. Oh my goodness, look at that.
Wow.
Jesus was hanged on Passover Eve. Anybody think that's true?
Yeah.
That's accurate, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
See in the Bible? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's why they had to take him down before the Passover started.
Right.
And you have to figure the days, by the way, differently. You have to figure them under Jewish days and not American days.
Exactly.
I'll not go into any more about that. So 40 days previously, the Herod had cried. This is something that occurred 40 days before, they say. He is being led out for stoning. They probably thought that would be what would have been done, like James.
Right.
But Jesus got another treatment because of what occurred. And he ended up not being stoned to death, which had been common, but to be crucified, which is the treatment that was given to seditionists and murderers and people that way. So Jesus got a different kind of death because he practiced sorcery. What kind of sorcery? Called miracles. Israel astray and enticed them to apostasy, which is certainly what the Sadducees and many of the Pharisees and others believe.
Right.
Whoever has anything to say in his defense, let him come and declare it. And there was one, by the way, no one, by the way. Matter of fact, Pilate was his greatest supporter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Really, when you read the stuff,
Sure.
he didn't want to get into that. He had enough problems already with Rome. He didn't want another one. And particularly his wife's dream scared him.
Yeah.
As nothing was brought forward in his defense, he was hanged on Passover Eve. When the word hanged, they don't mean like we put him around the throat. That's talking about a crucifixion.
Right.
All right, let's keep moving. Sanhedrin, this again, it goes back to Jewish documents. Rabbi Ullah said, would you believe that any defense would have been so zealously sought for him? He was a deceiver, and the all-merciful one says, you shall not spare him, neither shall you conceal him. It was different with Jesus, for he was near to the kingship. Notice the Sanhedrin, we're talking about a period of time between AD 70 and 200. There is recognition in Jewish sources that Yeshua Mashiach was Jesus, as that being a viewpoint. They didn't buy into that, but that's what they recognized him to be declared to be by people. Now, the rabbis taught Jesus had 5 disciples, Matthai, Nakai, Nezer, Bunny, and Toda.
What?
This guy really didn't do his research.
Yeah.
But the other portion he did fine.
What the heck is Bunny?
Go to the next one. I'm continuing to move. I'm just trying to demonstrate how much people say there's not enough evidence that Jesus actually lived.
Yeah.
Really?
Mm.
What's all this stuff?
Yeah.
Historians understand this to be true. Pliny the Younger, letter to Trajan. Okay, no, this is the one I was thinking about before with you.
Oh, yeah.
110 maintained that their fault, that is Christians, their fault or error amounted to nothing more than this, that they were in the habit of meeting on a certain fixed day. What would that day be?
Sunday.
Before sunrise, and reciting an antiphonal hymn, that was said before, to Christ as God, and binding themselves with an oath not to commit crime. This is basically a repetition.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I don't need to say much more. I think I accidentally left that in there. But the fact is that this is a pretty standard document. Continue on. I'll move on. Ignatius was an early church father. Again, he's living right around the turn of the first and early second century. And Ignatius, as a early Christian, said Jesus Christ, who was of the race of David, here's information.
Mm-hmm.
David, when were the Gospels written? Varies with people, but at least by 60, unless John's Gospel was probably in the 80s.
Right.
But what you have, Jesus Christ was born, race of David, son of Mary, truly born. That's how the word truly born, and ate and drank. Why are they saying that for? The real, honest to goodness human.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't only just a human, he was a young human that grew up. And that's what's being said here. Was truly persecuted under Pontius Pilate, was truly crucified and died on the side of those in heaven and on earth, and those under the earth, who moreover was truly
raised
from the dead. Don't you find that word interesting in this?
Truly, I do.
I'm pounding my hand on the pulpit is what he's doing.
Right.
It says, this really happened. He's pounding this pulpit saying, this is really true. It's not a myth. It wasn't made up. This is what really happened. That's what he's doing. That's Ignatius. Continue. So, almost the entire New Testament can be reconstructed from the writings of the ante-Nicene church fathers, writings as well as from the Christian Apocrypha and the Pseudepigrapha. These are early documents, and I haven't got time to teach you early patristics right now, but the point of it is that these are early documents that were developing during the end of the first century, beginning of the second century, on into the third century, and so forth. So the New Testament is quoted so much that you could probably find a way to get most of it put together if in fact you have the church fathers' writings to do it with. So there's a lot of evidence. This idea of there's no evidence is a bunch of nonsense. Now to go on. Okay, now, is there evidence outside the New Testament? Part 2, I want to talk about archaeological evidence.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't need to take a long time in talking about these. I was wanting to basically deal with the fact that people say, well, Jesus, we don't even know he lived. There's not enough evidence. There's plenty of evidence. Now, you don't have to argue that he's God for evidence, but you can't argue his existence wasn't there and recognized. That's all I'm trying to prove. The issue of God comes on later on with other kind of arguments. Okay, continue. By the way, you like my outfit? That's what I usually wear when I'm doing archaeology stuff.
Nice. Yeah.
All right, let's continue. I love this statement from Nelson Gluck. Now, Gluck was not a Christian. He was an American rabbi, archaeologist, did a lot of work over there. But there's a statement he makes I want to give you in just a second. Don't read it yet. The fact is, Gluck was fairly broad-minded. He was open to hear. A lot of modern Jewish archaeologists, particularly, but also a lot of liberal scholars, they tend to be what are called minimalists. They just think there's not any evidence much to speak of. Then you have called maximalists, who believe that there's quite a bit of evidence in archaeology to find that can support viewpoints. And Gluck was a maximist, as he wrote. Here's his quote at the top. As a matter of fact, however, it may be stated categorically that no archaeological discovery has ever controverted a biblical reference. That's a strong statement. Scores of archaeological findings have been made which confirm in clear outline or exact detail historical statements in the Bible. What a statement from a Jewish archaeologist who's not Christian. But he says, I've done the work. I've been working a long time in this, and this is what I find to be true. So that's a good statement to keep with you. Nelson Glick. By the way, he was, if you're in Israel, I mentioned last time about at the Qumran and the fact you have the cave there, cave 1, and you have the wadis.
Right.
The guy that died, he didn't know. I mean, the water came around so fast and surprisingly, he did not get up high enough to get away from the water, and he actually drowned when he was there at that time.
Wow.
Continue on.
Okay.
Here's just some archaeological things. Oh, I had to give you this guy, Abraham Biren. He's an interesting guy. I spent the day with him at Hebrew Union College, and he is a great guy. I have a picture in my study Bible with me holding this thing too. Matter of fact, I held this before the Hebrew Union Museum got hold of it. But he's demonstrating where he found the statement that talks about the King David, demonstrating that David lived. This is the earliest thing we had to work with, and he found this at Tel Dan. Okay, continue on.
House of David, yeah.
Now, there are a few other things we could turn to if you got an extra couple hours. But notice the listing, and I have more I could put down. I just wanted you to know there's lots of evidence in archaeology in reference to Jesus in particular, but in other issues of the Bible, like Glick was talking about. Archaeology has demonstrated for us that the Bible has a lot of evidence to support it. That's outside that. Now, see, there was a day of Albright, who was a very conservative but well recognized scholar, who held to a very strong view, like Glick did. Many archaeologists today doing work really give no confidence at all in what you look at. I sat down by one of them at the Pool of Siloam one day, actually, or maybe he sat by me, whichever one it was. But I'd spent a whole day with him at the Western Wall once, and he had such a negative view about most findings, other than his own. You realize, but most other people's findings he found to be basically incredulous in much respect. So these are maximalist and minimalist, and so. Here's some things. Caesar Augustus, Herod the Great, all these people who are known in biblical terms are substantiated in history and not in any way less Jesus. Let's keep moving. I can't go through all those. Here's some examples. Caesar Augustus, he was an emperor at the time of Jesus. He had become emperor, and Jesus was born it depends on when you put it, 5 to 4 BC. Some people put it 2 BC, whatever. But it's at the time of Augustus Caesar, and this was a coinage that was done. Next. Herod the Great, we have evidence of him. He was a very important king supported by Rome. He was sort of crazy in the head.
A little.
Crazy in the head. But he was so suspicious about people and taking his throne, sort of like Antipas. All these guys were just concerned about somebody's going to get rid of me and assassinate and take over. But the thing is, I guess sometimes they weren't so bad, because that did happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
But here's Herod the Great, the king when Jesus was also born. He's king of what we would think of as Israel today, but Judea. And so he was put in by, he's a Jew put in by the emperor.
Right.
Probably would have been Augustus too. Continue. Just show these are characters of the Bible that actually existed. This is a census of Quirinius during the reign of Caesar Augustus. Remember talking about Caesar Augustus, birth of Christ, Okay.
Yep.
King Herod, all these things are occurring before 1 AD. These are all before 1 AD.
Hmm.
4 to
Wow.
5 to somewhere in that area, the birth of Christ. And these people who are players in the biblical text, in other words, you encounter these people around the time of the birth of Christ. Do you understand?
Mm. Yep.
That's why I'm showing these guys. These are known to be true people. Now, here's something significant. Was there really a census? This is a lot of things liberal scholars say, aha, the Bible is wrong because there was no census here. And yet we have some very good information that, in fact, there was not only a census at earlier times, but really these censuses were started off in theory and became reality. It took sometimes several years for them to actually the event to occur.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have a proclamation, and then you'd have a fruition of the proclamation to occur over a period of several years. It didn't occur just in 6 months. They didn't have the kind of traffic and putting things together and all the kind of things we do. If they'd only had the IRS, just think.
Yeah.
But
Or the Pony Express.
so it's not a problem about the census being mentioned in the Gospels.
Mhm.
People say, well, it's wrong because that was already done. No, it was initiated and then finally completed. And it's during that time that we're dealing with the census of Quirinius and the birth of Christ. And that's the point to make to you.
Mm.
Next.
Next.
Now, I'm not going to go into this. If you want to read it later, I just don't have enough time to do all this tonight. It's hard to get through all this. But the point of it is, what I'm saying here is it's been confirmed even by very fine scholars. These are not ETS graduates, ETS members. These are well-known scholars in their fields. Go ahead.
The real deal.
It's been confirmed.
Yeah.
It's Bethlehem. I took this picture back at about 06 BC. And this is what it looked like in those days. Bethlehem does not look that way today.
Oh.
By the way, if anybody wants to go to Israel, I'm starting up my tours again. I used to go about 3 times a year, and COVID knocked so much of it out.
Mm.
And I stopped doing it because I was concerned about there being a lot of close downs and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it's looking good, so we're probably going to start setting this up again this fall.
Mm.
Bethlehem is a beautiful little city to go to, and there's a lot of interesting things. But this would be more like it was in the ancient days. Continue on. Pontius Pilate, did he actually live, or was that just a biblical statement? Well, we find that he did live. This one's interesting because if you pay attention to the way that people put together these biblical sites archaeologically, some people helping are not really archaeological attuned. They're not looking for things.
Mm.
This right here actually was found in a staircase in Caesarea by the sea, sometimes called Caesarea Maritima.
Mm-hmm.
Sea. And when they were finding stones, same thing at Till Dan. That thing about David was found in 3 parts, and it was on the ground upside down, and a woman kicked it and saw an inscription, and all of a sudden everybody came out to dig because the inscriptions are so important. This is the same way. This actually was in the staircase, was not known until a person working on these is putting this stone up, and he saw writing.
Wow.
When you see writing, the first thing you do is call the archaeologist to come look.
Mm.
That's what you learn if you've gone on these. So this is, go ahead and go to the next one. We'll show it to you more detail.
Mm.
Oh, that's not okay. I've said what he said. They found it in a stairs case. Go ahead and show you the next one. This is where it is. This is looking up close. And this is in the Hebrew Museum now. But what it says at the top, Tiberium, and the other one is the word, let's see, what is that? Philetus. And this is about Tiberium actually is an emperor at that time. That's
Tiberius, right?
Okay. Go to the next one. I think I've got it there more easy. Next one.
Let's see. Tiberium.
Miriam, yes, that's what I want to show.
Pontius.
What I was trying to come out with my head. I knew it wasn't Pilate, so I thought, what is this? It actually, it's the.
Oops. Oh, that's a good one.
Go back. It is Pilate, but it's not written Pilate. It's another in the Latin form.
Yeah.
Can you go back one?
Back one?
Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
Go back. Okay.
Right.
So I've done it where you can see it. Tiberium there in Latin is the word for the emperor. Pontius Pilate is found there in the Latin, and it's the words come together; they're not separated. Right. And the next one down says basically praefectus. We've oftentimes used the word procurator; they didn't. Praefectus of Judah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So this is actually a very good piece of evidence that Pilate actually existed. Continue on now. Just a little bit on this. Joseph Caiaphas was very important in the Sanhedrin in the time of Christ when he was put to death. And Caiaphas probably was the working in. There's a little confusion because there's a father-son operation going on here. But if you go to Mark 10, you'll read a very interesting passage where he stands up and says, "Tell us plainly, are you the let's see, what does he say? The Son of Man?" I'm not sure
Son of Man, I think so.
I don't think he uses Son of God.
No.
Anyway, what it is, Jesus says to him, "I am."
Right.
And I think it is Son of Man. Oh, I know what he said now. I had to think. Are you Son of the Highest?
Mm-hmm.
What he said. And Jesus said from Daniel 7, "And you will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory."
Mm-hmm.
That's a wonderful statement because the high priest is saying, "Are you the Son of God? I don't believe all this stuff. We got witnesses against you." And Jesus said, "Well, when I come back, I'll have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit more. I'll be the one doing the judgment."
Yeah.
That's what you see. Anyway, on the side here is a statement that's Caiaphas is. On the other side, he has an abbreviation form of it, like Kafu. We keep going. This is an ossuary where they put bones and so forth after a year, after the bones and the flesh had all decayed, and they put them in these ossuaries. Continue. Yeah. Jesus is looking over Jerusalem. Continue. I have something else there. Remember that? Luke 19, you can read it. "For the days will come upon you when your enemies will throw up a banquet before you, surround you, hem you in, never go to the ground, your children with you, and they will not leave you one stone upon another, because you did not recognize the time of your
visitation.
You didn't recognize that I was coming."
Right.
And so that actually was fulfilled. But Matthew 24 and Mark 10? I can't remember now. But anyway, is the statement that deals more with the second coming, not the destruction of the city. Continue on. That's just showing you some of the leftover of what happened when they pushed the stones. They actually didn't destroy all the buildings. That's what the apostles were saying. Aren't these wonderful buildings? And Jesus said, "They'll all be gone." They did not destroy all the walls all the way down. And this is a result of some of it where you can look. To the left, these are little shops that people actually shopped in. And Jesus actually walked on these stones that you see going down the way by those shops. I always told people, we're walking today where Jesus walked 30 feet above. Now you can walk the same year. So
yeah. Wow.
Go ahead.
It's like going to the mall.
This is a guy that Ronnie Rice, I spent all day with him. He was the major archaeologist of the area there.
Who's that young guy next to him?
And,
Who's that young guy next to him?
No, that's me.
Ooh.
That's me before I knew anything. So, the fact is, these are stones to give you a feel for how big some of these were.
Yeah.
They make the stones at the pyramids to look like little dwarfs. You start looking at them. Continue on. Now, this is an ossuary. It's only a piece of it. This is an ossuary side And I saw it in Canada at a meeting somewhere I was at. I don't remember what it was exactly, but they had it inside a big case. But this actually says in Hebrew, James, son of Joseph and brother of Jesus. Now, this was discounted by many Jews, and it went up to court. And they brought in people without the skill in epigraph, being a epigraphist, this kind of writing. I read all the materials and wrote an article on it because it's amazing the people they brought into the trial who knew nothing about what the thing was about. And then they didn't bring the people that had a really better understanding of it. I am convinced this probably was an actual ossuary with the writing in it, because all the epigraphers agreed who worked on this that this is genuine, and that the way in which it's done demonstrates it's not a fake in modern days. So I think that's probably true. Remember, James was put to death, brother of Jesus. Okay.
Wow.
Oh,
Pretty
yeah.
Cool. Pretty cool. Yourself is his brother.
Go ahead. I know we're over a tiny bit here.
Oh.
Or is that the last one?
That was it.
Oh, my goodness, we made it.
Yeah.
I knew it would happen.
That's it.
That's all she wrote.
Okay, well, I hope you got something out of that. Appreciation of the fact that we have a lot of evidence regarding Jesus and the early church, and there's far more. I mean, if we had a few hours, we could go through a few more things, but I don't want to take the time for that. We're going to keep moving ahead because I want to get to deal with certain issues about the teaching of Jesus, what evidence we have of his teaching and places he was, like Cana of Galilee. I want to show you some geography, places, archaeological materials, and so forth that will help us to understand more about the person of Christ and what he did and so forth. And then we will move on to our last session. I want to talk about the issue of the trial of Jesus and the crucifixion and the resurrection of Jesus. And I've been at a conference that has a lot of wonderful things, and I took pictures. My wife actually took these. Mine turned out bad, but took pictures of all these various things they had up. It's all about the Shroud of Turin, and I've been working on that about 3 decades stuff. And I'm convinced the Shroud of Turin was actually the burial site of cloth.
You would think so, huh?
There's too much evidence, and I'll explain why that's so. And then we can talk about it. I mean, I've never been one to push having relics like was done in the days of the medieval church. They found relics for everything.
Right.
But this relic has scientific information behind it, geographical. There's just so much behind it. And I have some things that were put up at this that I took pictures of that sort of moved you point, because they had 3 categories there: science, they had another scripture, and another was history. And so some of them talked about science and history, some about history and scripture and so forth. But I've got the whole grouping, and I'll put those up, and we can talk about the Shroud of Turin. I think you'll find it interesting.
Yeah, I like that.
That's at the end of the time when we finish our last ones. Next time we're going to continue on and do a thing about teaching of Jesus, the events of Jesus, some of the cultural questions, some of the geography. We'll do some of those things this next time.
Sounds good.
Okay, questions, comments before we go?
With the James ossuary, could it be possible that we're mistaken, because the names James, Joseph, and Jesus were all pretty common back then? So how strong is the evidence that is actually the James, the actual brother of Jesus in the Bible?
That's a good statement, a good question. Well, see, it's the fact that I agree. Like Mary was used all over the place.
Right.
You don't find necessarily every name used that much. You won't find that, and I could be wrong, and I'm willing for Donald to find me wrong for next time. But I don't think you find the word Yeshua being used that much about individuals walking around. I'm not aware of that. Maybe I'm wrong. Joseph was more normal Mary was the most. That was a woman.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had James, Yaakov, which is a name like
Mm-hmm.
Jacob.
Right.
And so, yes, there could be, but the fact that you have it put together the way it is, so that you have that James, the son of Joseph, the brother of Jesus, Yeshua, which is an unusual name,
Mm-hmm.
I think that gives more credence to it, probably referring to James, who was probably put in Ossuary after he
Right.
was killed.
Yeah. Probably because at that time, obviously, they didn't have like last names like we have now. They would use descriptors,
Right.
son of, daughter of, or things like
They
that.
could identify you with what kind of work you did, like a
Yeah.
carpenter, Jacob the carpenter, or whatever.
Right.
By the city you
Or
live.
where you lived. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they had a few designations. They didn't have any last names in those days.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think it's probably genuine. But the courts didn't like it, and they let it get by and slip through and be knocked out. But I think that Craig Evans actually wrote a book on it. You can check that out if you want to look at that more.
Interesting.
Anything else?
Well,
Very
okay,
cool.
we're gonna go ahead and call it an evening then. It's an evening. Okay.
It is.
All right.
Well into it.
And then we will pick this up again next week at 8 o'clock.
Good to see you guys and ladies. Okay.
Adios.